confidence in her and lacks nothing of value. And it goes on to give a litany of why a woman is so valuable in this context. And it's very long, so I suggest you look at it because it is instructive in terms of requirements for a woman who's worthy, which is quite extensive, and you wonder, what is her mate actually doing? At least I did. And it's something that's often quoted, but maybe not always really deeply interpreted. So we're going to talk about what a woman is worth. And I'm going to start off with some preliminary research that I'm engaged in around the church supper. And I start with this photo. It's at the table, gender, culture, and cuisine. And we're on the left is the chef, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. On the right is her business partner and co-owner of the business that they have. And we are in the the Watkins Faculty House at Bennett College doing a cooking class as a feminist activity. So it began, my research began when I asked the question about what is going on in the African American Church Supper in North Carolina. I also serve as the chair of the African American Heritage Commission here. I just wanted to do some heritage kind of work. Just really kind of simple, documenting the practice of church suppers. It started off simply. I was also influenced by science fiction. You know I had to put this in here, Dr. McLucas. Especially Sandy, Octavia Butler, in terms of Dawn and Clay's Ark, which are two of her novels that have to do with, it has to do with quite a few things in terms of what it means to be human, but the crux of the story is what happens with our food sources. How does that make us human or make us not so human? And so my research is based, it's ethnographic research, participant observation, I use archival material, and also interviews. Two of the ideas that I'm working with in terms of anchoring the analysis is in intersectionality. So I can't understand this work at all without being able to look not just at race, not just at gender. I need to look at social class. I need to look at economics. So I'm weaving all of these together because I'm talking about these relationships that people have. Relationships with themselves as well as relationships with food. And then I'm also being interdisciplinary. So, church supper. Classic African American so far, but people may recognize it from other kinds of meals that are served to folks. You have your chicken, some kind of starch, rice, macaroni and cheese. Depends on where you are in the state or in the country, what is supposed to be there. Some kind of green, cooked very well vegetable. It could be greens or it could be smoothies. And then bread. And an essential feature of old-time African American church supper is a caramel cake. Now, they're hard to find. People don't usually make them that much anymore, but there was caramel cake, so of course I had that. And then green salad. Now this is, as I talked to some of the informants, fairly recent. When they were younger, you didn't really have so many of the green salads. But as older persons preparing meals, they are including green salads. So, classic African American supper, as I'm finding, because I still have a lot of research to do, of course, is the preacher. This is a Baptist church. It's in Gastonia, North Carolina. And this is also a preacher in the Baptist, in this particular convention of the Baptist church, who it is not always, and this is part of the gender inequality, allowed for women to be preachers, to be the pastor. But in this case, she is. And then this is one of the deacons, one of the oldest members of the church at this time. And he he taught me about. Does anyone recognize what this is? It's a green thing. It's not mint. It's not basil, not garlic. It's poke salad. Who's heard of poke salad? Just a couple. Poke salad is a wild green that grows just pretty much ubiquitously throughout the South. But you don't prepare it just any kind of way. And I had an extensive lesson on how to prepare the poke salad so that I wouldn't kill anybody. Because it can be poisonous. And that is but this wasn't, the reason I put this here is that people would collect poke salad during poke salad season, and it would be part of the food stuff. But you had to, of course, know what to do. So I was interested, and I'm still interested in how that knowledge is transmitted intergenerationally. Because I think my young people here who are from North Carolina, do y'all prepare poke salad? No. The church supper here in Gastonia, Center Baptist, originated, okay, how do I get back? I don't know. Okay. The scene that you saw with the outside, these church suppers began with tables outside underneath the trees. And later on, they brought it inside as they were able, and that was it right there. Thank you. They were able to build, as tithes came in to the church, they were able to build and increase the size of the church property, which included a fellowship hall. So these fellowship halls brought folks inside, but it also, as I'm finding, began to change the practice from people bringing potlucks into the church supper experience to having it catered. And I'll mention it a little bit later, the importance of these catering activities, that they would have someone else prepare the meals, rather than have people bring from their homes the various dishes. And so this is something, again, that I'm beginning to document, that transition. So, we're talking about inequality and gender inequality, and one of the things that is striking is when you look at who has culinary professionalism, who that looks like. It tends to look like white males, white elite males, and they're called chefs. And this was from Mother Jones, from Tom Philpott, who regularly writes about food. And he went to this wonderful activity outside of New York City, but he's asked, where are the female chefs? And he's listing here all of these internationally known male chefs. And I decided to look at how we would define if you wanted to go to culinary school. And so I showed I picked one of the schools that, or one of the gateways into culinary school. They have a listing of all these schools. And they say, 2 to 4 year culinary degree. You read those. Oh, I did it again. And this is the slide I wanted to get to. They have 2 different ways of looking at chefs. The chefs that go through a culinary school experience or are trained as an apprentice. But if you're just a cook, you're lower level, you are dabbling, they use language like dabbling in the kitchen. And if you've ever really watched someone who really knows how to move in the kitchen, they're not really dabbling. They're preparing meals, they're preparing foods. And so this difference in language and how we conceptualize what is considered professional work and what is considered casual work or unpaid labor when it comes to How do we understand knowledge and authority? And what are the perceptions we hold regarding the production of knowledge? So I'm interested in these ideas because we've got this hierarchy that if you're professional, have been trained in a particular way, then you are the one who can orchestrate how it is we enter into this particular field. We also denigrate the work that's done primarily by women and girls, hands of women and girls. So in my interview, I just wanted to show that I actually spoke with folks. This is Dr. Helen Chavis Oto, and I deliberately put her in here because of her family's extensive history in the state of North Carolina. Her ancestor was John Chavis, who was a free black who fought in the Revolutionary War. They're still in their home area of Oxford, North Carolina. And so when she brings out the traditions that they have around cooking as members of the Episcopal Church, it is from this kind of lineage. And she connected it to the social activism of her family. And so she had to bring out the Dutch pot, the Dutch oven. And she showed me the two different cookbooks that she used as she was growing up and that her mother used. Another plate, right? Similar. This time I had to get it with the macaroni and cheese. Again, another gathering of supper. But it's with the Nature Lovers Garden Club. They were celebrating their 60th anniversary. I put this picture in because this is, at their heyday, how they would have presented. And so here's where class intercedes. We have a very much the politics of respectability in terms of black women's expression of themselves. Hats, gloves, look at Bennett in the 50s, hats and gloves. And here's sort of the remnant of the club now. Still dressed to the nines. The youngest member is up top. These are, the co-owners of Sweet Potatoes, and I put deliberately Chef Stephanie Tyson because she matches what you say about someone who has this culinary experience. Not only just the experience, but she has her own restaurant, she directs people. She came to our class to talk about being a black woman in this field and how few are recognized. It's not that few exist, and that is what was interesting to me. Here is another shot by another baker who was a black woman. And so I'm starting to collect who these people are, at least in the state of North Carolina, to again document their existence. And that I consider a political act. What else is going on in terms of food and what I'm capturing are these festivals or these activities that recollect enslavement. So they recollect these suppers that would have been prepared. And it's kind of interesting. It's here they're at historic Stagville, which at one time was one of the largest plantations. They had about 700 enslaved persons. And that's in Durham, North Carolina, not too far from here. Here is the menu that they had for this recreation. Sweet potato biscuits. Mary Randolph is a cook who wrote a book about hearth cooking. Then we've got okra soup. Things you would think are part of a Southern black tradition. And deliberately so. And I have to show you what bush is. It's sort of a cornbread and savory food kind of mixture. It doesn't sound appealing. So this is what the hearth cooking actually looked like as they were outside in Stagville. And got it right this time. This young woman she's a culinary reenactor, just like we have the the Civil War, well, she does this as part of her work. So I have a conflicted kind of feeling about this recreating what it would have been like to have been enslaved, because the freedom that she was able to manifest in that practice gives a sort of skewed idea of how people would have really interacted. I don't know. I do know the foods, though, would have been foods that were used, like the sweet potato biscuits. This is going to be, these are sweet potatoes, different potatoes that they're getting ready to put on the hearth. And that's the meal. That's kush. So you see, it's like cornbread, has peppers in it, onions. That's sweet potato biscuit. That's the okra that they made mixed with the greens. The best fried chicken I have to say I ever had. The roasted meat, sweet potatoes, regular roasted potatoes, and then Mary Randolph's biscuits or bread or rolls. So what I want to bring your attention to are some of the references that I think are important, and the authority, the voices that have weighed in for a long time in terms of American cooking. It's not just African American, it is American cooking. And I start with what I thought was one of the oldest books by a Black woman, called What Mrs. Fisher Knows About Old Southern Cooking. And I found out, I wouldn't be a good anthropologist without artifacts. I found out that there's another book. It's called The Domestic Cookbook by Melinda Russell, and it was published in 1866. And in it are various receipts, not recipes, they're called receipts. And there isn't a lot of what we would traditionally think of as Southern cooking. She was primarily a baker, but her influence was European, which was very interesting. It puts a different kind of twist, because she is doing her cooking not just in a Southern context, Tennessee, but she ends up in Michigan. Part of her story, she ends up in Michigan is because on her way to Liberia to be part of this colonial experience, I call it colonial experience, but colonization by blacks of Liberia, she's robbed. And she's robbed in the mountains area of Virginia. So she ends up staying near Abington, Virginia, until she can raise enough money. She thinks she has enough money, she gets married, they go to California, they come back. She's robbed a second time of all her savings. So she goes to the Garden State of Michigan to do her cooking, and she explains it in this way, if I may. She says, and I'm quoting, "Hearing that Michigan was the garden of the West, I resolved to make that my home, at least for the present, until peace is restored. And when I think of returning to Greenville, Tennessee, to try and recover at least a part of my property. This is one reason why I published my cookbook, hoping to receive enough from the sale of it to enable me to return home. I know my book will sell well where I have cooked, and am sure those using my receipts will be well satisfied." Paw Paw, Michigan, May 1866. And the original is at the University of Michigan in their culinary library, and I find it fascinating to be able to get a different kind of view on what it means to be Black cooks, Black chefs, Black folk engaged in this culinary experience. The final thing I would like to say, is that time out? Is the other person who's heavily influenced my work is Sue Bailey Thurman. Anyone familiar with Sue Bailey Thurman? Again, In her lifetime, she was quite well known. She was very active. She was the wife of Howard Thurman, who was a noted theologian. She published, among several different kinds of publications, the historical cookbook of the American Negro. And her idea was that Black Negro history could be realized through the culinary arts. We looked at the various dishes that were prepared and were part of the repertoire. We can understand a certain kind of history. And it's not a regular cookbook where it's categorized by dish, but instead it goes from the calendar year, January, all the way to December. And she attributes various months to different noted figures and has recipes that follow them. The other thing that I find interesting with Subaltern Thurman is that she and her husband, with a small group of African Americans, traveled to India in 1936 on what was called the Pilgrimage of Friendship and met with Gandhi. And I found the reference to this in Emory Library, in their archives, in a newspaper article that was part of her collection. And I find it interesting that here is this 1936 discussion of Black folks talking about nonviolence. This is pre many of the discussions that come later, but knowing that Howard Thurman was very close to Dr. Martin Luther King, you start seeing this kind of synergy, these kinds of connections of people operating in their lives at their time and the influences that they have. They traveled to various colleges and universities in India, in Ceylon at the time, which is Sri Lanka, and Myanmar, which is at the time they were traveling was called Burma. So this also gives this international consciousness that is infused in the work that these people are doing, and so that Subaltern Thurman's work on a cookbook is connected to a global experience. And I think that's important for this to come out of the work that is not just local, that I'm talking about, this experience of food, but that it is the core of who we are as humans, what we eat, and how we define ourselves.
Hey, what's up now?
Brother, what's up?
This is a groovy party, man.
Yeah,
I
brother,
can dig it.
Stop. Right on.